Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Semarkey, Mariadb, and Sandhill Consultants. I'm Stephen Fegg, Director at Database Trends and Applications in Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Conquering Data Integration and Governance Challenges in the Modern Enterprise. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question is not selected during the show, you will receive an email response. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we have Brett Hansen, Chief Marketing Officer at Semarkey, Lewis Carr, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Mariadb, and Jeffrey Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Brett to get us started. Welcome to the broadcast, Brett. Hey, Brett, are you with us?
I am.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. So 15 minutes to talk about data integration and data governance is quite a challenge. So I thought I would use the next 14 minutes and 30 seconds or so to really talk about what we hear from our prospects and our customers as they engage, overcome their data integration, data governance challenges. So to kick things off, I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of these challenges in some way, shape, or form, but I find it's helpful to speak to them, to codify them, because it's important as we start to think about what's next. How do we overcome them? So again, we talk to dozens and dozens of companies every month and work with hundreds of companies around their integration and governance challenges. And we hear three consistent themes with regard to what are the challenges? What are the things that are stopping them from achieving their goals? And the first is business requirements. And by the way, I would star, asterisk, underline, circle this. It is certainly the most profound part of the challenge. Two things that happen. First is not enough attention is paid to details at the start. And so projects get underway, everyone thinks we're on the same page, and then at the end of the project, business and technical find that they're misaligned. The second is changes occur over time. Businesses are moving quickly, their requirements change, and the longer the project, the more time spent between the initial requirement gathering and the deployment, the more likely there is to be some sort of disconnect. So without a doubt, we always come back to what are the business requirements? What are you trying to achieve? The second is this bigger challenge of governance, and obviously it's part of what this conversation is about, which is, obviously there is a value to having as many people have access to data as possible. We want people to be able to access the data to overcome whatever business challenges that they have. At the same time, we know that the more access, the lack of control, the more likely you are to have compliance issues or risk. And so finding a pragmatic approach to balancing that is always an issue. Third is the complexity piece. And with complexity, it's the fact that sources have changed, formats have changed, locations have changed. There's all these different elements that has sort of reimagined the requirements around data projects. And then finally, and this is true for almost any IT project, but I feel it's especially acute today with data, is talent, resources. And it's not only being able to access and find those resources, it's being able to efficiently move them from project to project, and again, evolve with the business requirements over time. So many of you are either facing all of these or some of these, but again, as I look at customers coming into Semarkey and beating their heads against the wall and pulling out their hair, we hear these themes over and over. So the question then comes, of course, why? What is causing projects to fail? And depending on which analyst research firm you read or look at, it's as high as 80% of all of the different data projects fail. And it comes back a lot to some of the things we talked about previously. The number one is the inability to align the technical requirements with the business requirements. And there's no simple answer on how to achieve that, but it does come down to making sure that you have a plan and then you have the tools necessary to rapidly allow you to meet the business objectives versus long, tedious, multi-quarter efforts that ultimately will likely cause a disconnect. The second thing we see is a siloed discipline and tool approach. And I know this is unusual as we're on a call about two silos, but we're going to speak to the fact that there is a need to take a holistic perspective. I can't tell you how many customers have come in and said, hey, I've been focusing on X, data integration, or I've been focusing on data governance, and now the larger project initiatives have been unsuccessful. And so it's valuable to, yes, have a focus, being able to speak to one of the domains and specialties, but at the same time, always having a broader vision of what is required for the business. And then the third piece is slow and inflexible. And we see that all the time where the tools that they're using, the processes they're using are quite honestly from a bygone era. And obviously, I have a little bit of a motivation here being the fact that we have a modern tool, but it's also something that keeps repeating itself. And I think what we're seeing is, like anything in IT, there is an evolution, right? So for years, these tools, these processes work for me. Now in the new world that I live in with higher business expectations, more complexity in terms of the data sources and where the data is, I need to move faster. And so having that acknowledgement of change is absolutely essential to be successful. So with that as a backdrop, let's talk a little bit about sort of how we see success occurring. So first and foremost, it's taking a structured approach. And I won't deny that quite a few of the clients that come into us haven't taken that approach, right? And again, they might be focusing on a singular pillar. They might be focusing on one aspect versus having a broader perspective of what they're trying to accomplish. And coming back to this top bullet, and I know I'm a broken record here, understanding business objectives. The second is the forward-looking methodologies. And we're speaking of that is things are going to change. Change is inevitable. Whether it is changes in business requirements, whether it's changes in technical requirements, whether a combination of both, right? So ensuring that you have forward-looking methodologies, and it's not a crystal ball, but planning for eventual change is essential. The third is education and discussion around data governance. What are your requirements from the business? Who does need access? How do they need access? And then backing the other side of the coin, what is my requirements around compliance and security? And having those conversations earlier, more frequently, and certainly documentation. And then measuring everything. And I can't stress this enough is, how do you know if you're successful or not unless you're tracking? And that comes from both a business and technical side. So what are my KPIs? How do I know if this is successful? And honestly, that can help have much more informed conversations with the business side as they come and ask for continued change. And then maintain the governance conversation. So it's not a single conversation. It's not a let's gather requirements and then be done with it. It's maintain that conversation throughout the life cycle and then bringing that into the KPI conversation as well. So, is part of the reason why we're having issues is because of, we don't have the right people have access. Or the other side of the coin, we're too loose with access and you lock things down. And then leveraging the latest technologies. This is a environment that has gone through a substantial amount of change. And so taking a step back and acknowledging the fact that, again, processes and technologies that might have worked in the past may no longer be relevant. So we certainly think about a world beyond just the MDM and data governance and data integration. And we think about looking at all these different elements and, again, a codified and cohesive approach. So certainly you want to be agile. You want to be able to take a modular approach and understanding that there are going to be different needs for the business and the technology at any one point in time. But acting independently and within a silo will ultimately, in our opinion, lead to challenges. And so it's absolutely critical to think about the elements of governance and catalog and quality and integration and management together. Because ultimately, any one element is unlikely to deliver, again, the business results that you're searching for. The other part of this to think about is the concept of AI, ML, and rich analytics and big data. Those are obviously the sexy catchwords of the day, and we're all very excited about what they can do for the future. But it would be a mistake to assume you can leap over sort of that first step in terms of having the right data management, integration, quality, catalog, and governance strategy and go right into an AI, ML type environment. And again, speaking to prospects who have come to us challenged, that approach will often lead to more challenges than they expect. And so having that first step created where you're looking at high quality cleansed data is absolutely essential. So I spoke about the technology piece, some ideas around things that we consider to be critical. And of course, again, I'm representing a vendor here, and so our technology certainly speaks to this, but it's also something which we can see consistently across multiple different customers. And I've kind of divided this up at a high level between sort of the concept of data management and governance and quality, and then data integration, the blue versus the green. So data mapping, we think is absolutely critical, which is thinking about it from a perspective of starting with the business requirements and the business objectives, and then having the tools that allow you to, design the outcome and then have automation deliver the application for you. The second is the business-centric UI. Without involving the business and having them being part of the discussion and helping define the requirements, you increase your risk for disconnect. And so having a business-centric UI is not, hey, business, go design this yourself, because we all know that would be probably a disaster. But being able to involve them and help them understand exactly what you're hoping to achieve, which will ultimately, again, drive a more likely positive outcome. So we talk about governance. To us, it's about being pragmatic and putting governance in the context, again, of what is the outcome, and then looking at how do we efficiently provide governance so that the business achieves its goals, but again, we're not putting the business at risk of compliance or data breach. And then the last one, a little bit of motherhood and apple pie, I get that, but so important in the world that we live in, which is universal ingest and publish, being able to consume from anywhere and publish anywhere. On the integration side, universal mapping again comes up. Again, how do we look at what we're trying to achieve and be able to map that and then be able to produce code from that? The second is metadata management, which of course is the idea of having reusable templates that the team can use efficiently and easily, and then also allows that skill to be transferred to the next project. Because as we talked about, one of the big challenges, of course, is finding the right resources and headcount to be successful. And then finally, an ELT approach. And for us, what we find is, focusing on a specific project, focusing on a specific initiative, you're going to have a more likely positive outcome. And the ELT approach, which decentralizes that transformation architecture, allows you to handle large volumes efficiently, regardless of what technology you have. So certainly we could create a longer list, but these are some of the things that jump out at us that help identify what's going to be successful from a technology perspective to ultimately deliver the business results. Okay, so a little bit of a commercial here for a unified data platform. This is our approach. I'm not going to go through all the details, but what we're looking at is attempting to deliver that platform that allows you to focus on specific areas like governance, like integration, but is cohesive and supports the other critical elements of your data project, including discovery, management, reporting. And being able to have that balance of modularity, but also a unified approach So you can take a business mindset, but as requirements come in around government, you can get into the details and address any concerns. So my last slide, I think, is perhaps one of the most important one, which is, regardless of the technology, there's no silver bullet here. And I'm sure everyone on the call is nodding, yep, right? There's no tech that's perfect. And so an important part of this conversation is choosing a partner to help you go through it. What I can tell you is looking at our customer base, are there consistencies and similarities? Absolutely. Are there best practices? Absolutely. But no two projects are identical or even close to identical. Even in the same vertical, even in the same sort of basic use case, we still find variations in variables that have to be considered. And so that's why it's important to be thinking about a partnership with whomever technology that you want to look for. Because the idea of being able to buy and it's going to just come out of the box and whammo, I get everything I need and I'm not going to have to customize it, that's a foolish concept. It does indeed require specialization. And with that, you're going to want someone who has done this before and can work with you and can bring their expertise to bear to help. So I exhausted my 15 minutes. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of an understanding of what we're hearing from our customers and prospects and what we think are some of the best practices going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to, go ahead, Lewis.
Thank you very much, Brett. I'd like to reintroduce once again Lewis Carr, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Mariadb. Welcome to the broadcast, Lewis.
Thank you, Stephen. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. Well, that was interesting. I was so involved in listening to Brett, I kind of forgot. Oh, I have to speak next. My name's Lewis Carr. I'm from Mariadb Corporation. I'm a senior product marketing person at the company. And I do mean company. Now, for some of you that are familiar with databases, you're probably familiar with the Mariadb community, right? Because Mariadb is an open source SQL database. It's effectively, for those of you that don't know, it's a fork off of MySQL. MySQL was an open source and still is an open source database that was a separate company that got by Sun Microsystems, and in turn, when the sun set on Sun, pun intended, and it was bought by Oracle, many of the folks in the open source community decided to form MariaDB. We're the corporate version of it. There's MariaDB Foundation and there's the corporation. The difference is not in terms of the actual core source code. In fact, it's completely compatible with MySQL. Then MariaDB community server is what you get from the foundation. And a lot of people get it. There are over 60 million Linux distributions for which MariaDB is embedded in it. And then in terms of GitHub and Docker downloads, for example, with Docker, we've got over 1 billion plus downloads of MariaDB, which places us in the top 5. We are only one of 20 companies in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for cloud databases. In fact, our cloud database, SkySQL, which obviously you're not going to get that from the community. It's a database as a service, and you have to pay it at a minimum for the service itself, right? But we've won several awards from customers and communities for that. So that's kind of the background of what MariaDB is. That's the word from our sponsors, or me. It should be clear from what I've said so far that that's all we do. We build databases, and that is it. Databases are us, okay? So any workload, any cloud, any scale is what we're going after. So why am I here talking about conquering data integration and governance challenges? Well, that's really simple. The reason is that, remember that box that Brett showed on one of his slides? He had data management, data catalog, data integration, all these components. The fact of the matter is a lot of those components directly in and of themselves impact your data governance and your data integration strategy. further, as you get consolidation of some of these, as you get more and more features and functionality put in them that's taking them along a path that makes the data management, which is a broad category in and of itself, more functional, more flexible, is able to do the job better for a myriad of use cases, you will yet again impact the data integration and governance. So, I think it's important to not just take the tops down look that Brett just gave you, but if you are embarking on new projects and you're concerned with the data integration and data governance, chances are your IT team that's actually implementing the underlying data process for you needs to look at it from the bottoms up, from the actual products. Okay. And as we do this migration to cloud, what I would submit to you is that your data integration is changing. And why is that? Well, the center of gravity is changing. Everything's moving to the cloud. I'm sure I sound like Captain Obvious from the Hotels.com commercial saying that, because it's, everybody knows everything's moving to the cloud. But, unless you're a very small company in Greenfield, you're not going to get away with going to only AWS or only Azure or only GCP. Chances are that no one in this webinar, or very few of you, are in that bucket, right? Most of us are not going to completely get rid of our on-premises systems in the near term or even the midterm. And in fact, on-premises is growing in some sense if you consider the edge the new on-premises. The orange is the new black or something like that. But it's really, mobile and IT. That's where all this data is emanating from, right? And all that data that's emanating from there, increasingly there are rules and regulations about how you're supposed to use that data, whether it's from inside the corporation in terms of their data sovereignty issues, or it's because of external government regulations or industry regulations, right? So there's all this issue around, this data is moving from edge to cloud and back, which parts of it can be used when, by how and by whom, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it is that with all these different clouds, and you have to be concerned with, well, am I getting the cloud economics and innovation that's been touted or promised to me for over a decade now? And the answer to that is yes and no. I mean, nobody wants to go back to, forklift upgrades, CapEx nightmares of continually having to change the life cycle of the products. But you have to admit that there is this back and forth of how do I architect so they get the most out of the cloud without getting surprises in terms of how much it's costing me for compute or storage for any given service that's being delivered, particularly around running applications and associated databases. But what we're seeing is if you've got, as Brett was talking about, this interest in moving to using more data analytics directly in line with operational processes such as transactions, if you're looking at adding in more AI and putting it unsupervised at the edge, all these things are new ways of using the data that will require new ways of looking at the data integration challenges and the governance challenges. So that's really something that you have to keep in mind, and you have to do it not just from the top down, but from looking at each of the actual changes in the underlying architecture. So for example, with cloud databases, whether that be a data warehouse or a transactional database or a document store database, whatever it is, there's really 4 key main data integration issues that you have to be concerned with, right? The first is that, you kind of want to facilitate the data integration, right, to the cloud as soon as possible, right? Make it easier for new projects to get there, which is going to be a double-edged sword, because that means that if you have very stringent, controlling enterprise-wide data governance policies, how do you keep those policies and yet be flexible enough for people to kind of do their own thing? Because what's going to happen is if you truly make a lot of the data architectures, data platforms self-service, then you're going to end up with people doing whatever they want with the data. The other thing is, I thought it was interesting, Brett talked about ELT. I think from a database architecture standpoint, the point is to look for scenarios where you're able to reduce the ELT as much as possible, whether that be doing more of your data integration at the point of action immediately they're doing more of the data processing so that you're sending processed data where you can often mask or strip out things that are from a data governance standpoint, right? Because it's not just data governance from an access standpoint. You have to look at data governance from a standpoint of its use and by whom is it being used, not just who you're allowing access to it. Adopting standards for streaming, streaming data directly into the database, simplifying integrations across the data fabric by, again, putting things closer to the point of action, right? So these are the 4 things that I think are important. Now, let me try to put that in concrete terms for specific features or functionality that we're seeing added into databases, but most importantly, into databases that are the heart of what you see day to day in operation in mission critical applications, whether that be payment processing or your mobile banking or your taxes or whatever it may be, right? The databases that are involved in doing transactions, those day-to-day operations, as you start to add in new features, you could end up with a double-edged sword there, right? So that's something to really keep in mind, all right? So let me give you 4 quick examples. Incorporating JSON data. So until recently, document store databases or data warehouses and transactional databases, they were separate. And now with this consolidation, you're starting to get into terms of cloud data platforms, things are moving together. JSON, which is, for those of you that aren't familiar, is JavaScript object notation. It's a standard to support semi-structured data, right? It was adopted initially by NoSQL databases, but increasingly, all of your databases that are running transactional operations that are fully SQL, traditional RDBMS SQL databases, are getting JSON in them as well. And so that has an impact on what you're going to have to do for data integration and governance, because this JSON data has more complexity to it, right? Another example would be direct data loading, right? In order to meet the cycles and the speed and handle bigger sets of data, if you're putting it into S3 buckets or its equivalent into object storage, right? You then need to directly move it into the database to quickly activate or run a process, right? And this direct data loading that you're using to increase the speed, well, that means you're kind of, providing unmediated access to the data. You're providing potentially less transparency to it. So it becomes a double-edged sword. I want to improve the performance. I want to streamline things. But what does that mean for the integration and the data governance standpoint? Distributed SQL, another one. Now that's a big topic. It's big for us in our industry. We feel we're on the cutting edge there, and we believe there'll be a lot of adoption of it. But yet again, it's a double-edged sword, right? So I could be concerned with, what should I do with distributed SQL? Now you can use distributed SQL with a NoSQL database or SQL database. So it really covers the gamut. With a distributed SQL database, what I'm doing is I have the ability to run transactions across multiple regions, whether that be geographical regions or it's across multiple zones that are across multiple regions from a cloud standpoint. So I'm running transactions that are hitting or coming into my AWS or GCP or whatever cloud environment through one region, the East region. Others are coming through to the West, or more importantly, coming to France versus Germany or Japan versus China. And I want to be able to look at co-located with that particular transaction. First, checking the identity of the person, making sure that they should be able to do the transaction. Or maybe I want to also run some sort of analytics co-located with that transaction. Becomes yet again another example of a double-edged sword. So my point here is that as you start to look at adopting new features and functionality, you're going to have to look back at what you're doing for data governance, as well as integration, obviously. Let me give you a couple of quick case studies. I know I don't have time to go into a lot of this, since I'm probably running out of time. But here's an example where we had a customer that was using MySQL, which we're 100% compatible with that. But they were using it to do something that really needed a data warehouse, because there's a lot of integration of data coming from a lot of different sources in the case of this particular customer. Why? Because, well, they're involved in health informatics. So in this particular case, specifically, one of the key things that the, what are they called, Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation has done is they put out the majority of COVID stats for the U.S. They also provided those stats globally to World Health Organization and other countries for all sorts of reasons, right? Just to figure out even whether we or some other country want to put a travel ban or restrictions or what have you. So this was data that's used in critical decisions all around the world. Data is coming from everywhere. It's supposed to be accessed by a lot of people with high concurrency, and they were using a traditional database. And what they did is they shifted this to be a data warehouse, and they were able to do this without any issues around the data integration or governance, which is really critical. Another example is where B2B versus the one there, which is more B to citizen, I guess, to consumer. And here, this particular company, again, went from a mission critical environment down at on premises and moved it up to the cloud. And they were able to do that even over a period immediately before Black Friday, which for their customers is, the critical make or break for, oops, I didn't move to that slide. The critical make or break. I thought I hit the next. Yeah, it's this customer here. The critical make or break for their balance sheets because they're in the retail space. So, another quick word from our sponsors. This is the platform that's basically used for it. And you can try this platform for free. Somehow the font changed a little there, but you get a $500 credit to try it for free. But in conclusion, what I really want to make sure everyone understands, there's a top-down approach, but again, the first thing that Brett said was business requirements, right? And it's the synchronization of your technical side with your business side. And with digital transformation, there's a real blurring of those. And you're going to take that top down for data governance integration. But as you're looking at it from an architectural standpoint and looking at it for the way that the underlying technology is evolving, you need to look at it product by product, platform by platform as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Louis. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today, Jeffrey Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants. Welcome to the broadcast, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Stephen. It's always fun to go last. Let me start off this segment here with just a small diagram that's going to illustrate some of the things I'm going to talk about. It's Sandhill's view of our products and services, and it shows how it's a sort of a unified approach to handling things like data modeling, data governance, data cataloging. Each one of these areas contains technologies instrumental in integrating data. So we have services that deal with data modeling and how to make data modeling more governed so you can create metadata that can be reused over and over again. And on the data cataloging side, approaches with data governance to make sure that the data you're capturing in these data catalogs is well governed. So next, let's take a look at this whole idea of data governance versus data management, because sometimes these things get a little confused and people think that data governance is data management, but in reality, it's not. Data governance is kind of viewed as the overseer or supervisor of data management functions. Data management itself involves things like doing data quality, metadata management, data architecture, master data, and a bunch of other related functions. But that intersection between those two bubbles there, that is the agreed upon concept of what the data is as the business defines it. So let's take this a little further and start to look at the integration functions as well as the data governance functions. So The association between data governance and data management is bidirectional. Data governance provides the guidance on what the expectations are for the data, but doesn't explicitly say how you're going to do it. It doesn't do the work. Data management does the work, and they're responsible for making data a usable asset for the business. Data governance assures that it meets the business expectations. So as Brett was discussing, understand your business first is always a good idea. So on the left-hand side of this slide, data management's basic functions, and there are more, but here's just 4 basic ones. The ability to capture and extract information from various sources, to check the data quality to make sure that it meets the standard, make changes or updates to the data as needed, and move it from one place to another place. Data governance handles things like roles and responsibilities. That is, who's responsible for what? Does the data meet some sort of compliance, GDPR standards, things like that? If there's a conflict, how is decisions handled? Who is the one that makes the decisions? And then communication. How do we tell everybody about the data that we're now capturing and provisioning for everybody to use? So next, let's take a look at the challenges and solutions. So when we start looking at this stuff here, what we're saying is, how does data governance help with data integration challenges? The application of governance basically adds a certain amount of formality to working with data. So data governance is not a software product, as you heard Brett say. You can't go out and say, hey, I want to buy some data governance. It's just not possible. But technology does help manage all the intersections and moving parts of the intersections between governing the data and data management. So let's look at this. On the left-hand side, data integration issues. You're going to run into data that has different data names and types. So how does governance help with that problem? Implementing a certain data standards. You might use the ISO 11779-5 metadata naming standard to help with that. Data synonyms and homonyms. You always run across certain different systems and say, well, over here they called it customer, but over here it's called consumer. Is a consumer a customer? Is a customer a consumer? I don't know. So that's where your business glossary becomes really important to look at those particular distinctions. Disparate data sources. Where is it located? Where can I find it? That's where your data dictionary helps you with understanding what's in all those different data stores that might be in Mariadb, let's say. Data security and privacy. That's policy related. So we have policies that are in place to determine things like data security and privacy. And of course, data decision structure. How does data conflict get resolved? So we have to have some structures in place to actually help with that. So the next few slides here, I'm going to show how you can implement data governance. I'm going to use a product called the Data Intelligence Suite from Quest, but the concepts are going to be similar across all different data governance products. So it's not particular to one particular product. So let's start with policies. Now, policies are basically at the heart of data governance. The policies document the intentions of the business around data that ensures that the organization's data and information assets are managed consistently and used properly. So you heard Brett say that you have to understand the business. You keep harping on that. Well, a policy is really just the codification of some business intent. Policies guide behavior, what we intend for you to do, right? But one of the things that I run into with policies that you need to be careful of is not to start embedding things like procedures, standards, and other non-policy related information into the policy. Otherwise, the policy gets all muddied and it's not clear. So it's important to just keep policy information in the policy. Now let's take a look at the business glossary part of the equation. So one of the first questions business users always ask is, what does that data actually mean? In order for me to use it, whether I'm doing analytics or whatever, I need to actually understand what is meant by that. So a business glossary is instrumental in the semantic definition of what those business terms mean. So if I understand those terms, I can better understand what the data is supposed to be doing. Like I said, this is especially useful for things like analytics. Business synonyms and homonyms are also managed here. You know, you'll run into lots of, especially with mergers and acquisitions, where you've got two companies that basically have the same meaning for something, but are using completely different words for it, such as consumer or buyer or shopper or customer or any of these other things that we need to understand. So the glossary is helpful for that. And if you look on the left-hand side of this screen here, there is taxonomy. Taxonomies are useful in categorizing and classifying information so that we can better find it. That's another benefit of building the business glossary. So let's take a look at things like dashboards, because dashboards are pretty useful. And what they help you do is understand how your data governance program is performing. So as we know, data governance is not something that just ends when we stand up a data governance system. We actually have to keep monitoring it. So the dashboards help us with policies that still need to be reviewed, policies that are in place, business terms that need to be reviewed, business terms that are in place, etc. Now let's take a look at the whole idea of a data dictionary. Sometimes people get the data dictionary confused with the business glossary, but they're not the same thing. A data dictionary is more on the technical side of the house. So the business glossary helps with the meaning. The data dictionary captures the technical specifications of the data, including any technical abbreviations, tags, where it's located, and any other technically relevant information. So dashboards like this are helpful when people start to ask the question like, where can I find it? And what did you call that? Is it CUST, C-U-S-T? Is it CSTMR? Is it CUS? Where is that located and what did you call it? So these things help with that idea. Now, as I mentioned before, you have to have a certain structure on who's responsible for what. So two of the most important role assignments in data governance are who is accountable and who is responsible. Without accountability, there is no way to determine if the expectations have been met. Simply not possible. Without responsibility, there's no way to assign work, so we don't know who's doing it. So I can go through all the process of setting up data dictionaries, business glossaries, having the best software in town. But if nobody's watching the store, we have no idea what's going on there. So we have to have people and roles set up so that they can do the work that's required. And this is where it gets into the area where Brett was talking about, which is we have to have resources of people who can do the work, and they need to understand what work they have to do and when they have to do it. So let's take a look at the concept of workflow. Yes, it's true. I have people who are doing work and they do certain things such as look at business terms, manage data dictionaries, make sure that policies are being followed. But you have to have some sort of workflow so that we understand the person doing the work might have to go through a series of steps before it becomes validated, which means they may need to ask other people. So there should be some workflow, and that workflow should be auditable, because if there's going to be change in any system, change has to be governed. You can't just go in and make change for change's sake. We have to know why the change is going to be made, who is going to make the change, when the change was made, so that we have a full audit of what's happening in all these different systems we have. So let's take a look at data as it flows. So data is, of course, not static these days. Lewis mentioned that we have several different sources that can all be transferred or moved to another location. So whether this is ETL or ELT or any other mechanism by which we move information, we want to be able to understand where did it come from and where did it go, and more especially, what happened to it on its journey? Did its name change? Did its definition change? Did anything about it change that we need to know about? So we need to understand the data flow as well as the data lineage. Now, data lineage is a bigger concept in that it goes all the way up to the sources and all the way to the targets. Data flows might be a small segment of something, but it is important for us to understand all of this information about where things come from and where things go. Now, what we really want to understand is what is the big overall picture, right? So let's take a look at integration from a very, very big perspective. If you look at this particular picture here, it's actually divided into two halves. The little black rectangle in the middle, that's a piece of data. And in this case, it's address. Everything to the left in the orange boxes is technical. That is, what is the name, technical name of the thing you're looking for? What system is it contained in? What table can I find it in? What column is it related to? Everything on the right-hand side, that's business. So when it comes to this concept of an address, I need to understand what policies are in place about this thing. I need to know what standards does this thing apply to. So in this case, maybe it's the United States Postal Service standards, or if it's international, maybe it's more of an ISO-related standard. And on the context of the definition, when we say address, we can actually be looking at two different concepts. An address could be a physical place on the planet, but an address could also be some sort of electronic mechanism by which I can contact you. If I don't understand that, then we could get confused when we start asking about customer addresses. So this is where we want to understand how all of these things sort of fit together. So to sort of wrap things up here real quickly in my last few minutes, when you're standing up a data governance program, it's usually a project first. And that involves getting people together, assigning roles, assigning responsibilities, accountabilities, putting policies in place. And so you're going to want to have reports that are going to tell you how many roles have you defined that don't actually have people doing those roles? Or how many business terms do you have that don't actually have subject matter experts to verify if that's a good definition? These kinds of compliance reports are useful when you go and set up your data governance program. Once it's running, you can use the dashboards, but they're very useful for that. So in final, this is the contact information for Sandhill Consultants. If you are interested in reaching out and talking to us, feel free to use any of the information on this slide. And with that, I'm going to send it back to you, Stephen, for your final remarks.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. At this point in time, we're going to do some Q&A. Got questions from our attendees. First question is for Brett. Brett, how does XDI sit in the unified data platform?
It's a great question. When we talk about unified data platform, as I covered, we're thinking holistically about how to help organizations rapidly deploy a data solution that includes integration. XDI is our integration tool, and it allows companies to efficiently move data from one location to the next.
Got it. Thanks, Brett. Lewis, our next question is for you. Is JSON better than SQL?
Oh boy, I guess I was going really fast and things must have got mixed up. So it's apples to oranges. JSON is, think of it as the new version of XML. We understand what an extended markup language is, but this is much more flexible. It's been adopted by virtually every sort of data integration and data management platform. SQL is a non-procedural language that the vast majority of developers, data scientists, database administrators, everyone understands how to use this, taught everywhere in school. So apples and oranges.
Got it. Thanks, Lewis. Jeffrey, our next question is for you. Does DSI integrate with ETL tools like Informatica?
Yes, it does. The Data Intelligence Suite does have the ability to reach out and connect to different data sources, databases being one, and of course, ETL tooling being another. So things like Informatica, Talent, I think Ab Initio, some of those others are out there so that you can pull in metadata from those sources into your catalog so that you'll understand the lineage, how things changed and were modified. And because you can do that, you can readily keep those things up to date simply by connecting to those systems.
Understood. Thanks, Brett. Or excuse me, thanks, Jeffrey. Brett, our next question is for you. Do you recommend bringing in a data integration solution at the beginning of a data management project or later in the journey?
Excellent question. I'm going to give a really bad answer, which it depends. It's all about looking at what you're trying to achieve. Frequently, we find that an initial step that customers need to take is the data integration element. And for that reason, you're going to want to look at, what do I need to move in order to get my data in a position where I can take advantage of with a master data management type solution to deliver on the business results. Other times, you can start with a less substantial type effort, which we often find to be a best practice. Get the results, prove out the model, demonstrate to your business leaders that you have a working solution, and then you can look to bring in larger sets of data, sort of fill out the rest of your solution. So it really depends on the needs, but like everything else I've been saying, it starts with what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve.
Understood. Thanks, Brett. Lewis, we're moving back to you. Question is, won't consolidation of various products into a single platform make data governance and integration easier?
It may, but at the end of the day, whether you consolidate those platforms, it does nothing about where the data is located. It does nothing about how disparate it is. It does nothing about where and when it makes the most business sense to actually process the data, or from a data governance standpoint, as both Brett and Jeffrey are talking about, and how you agree on handling it based on the policies and the business requirements. So unfortunately, no. If anything, the problem with platforms is that they're all built up from the vantage point of the area of strength that the particular company started from. So if you have a company that did cloud, that did data warehouses, then their platform's going to start from that perspective. If they started like, I don't know, an Informatica from data integration, or Click from a data visualization, the platforms are going to lean that way, and their viewpoint of what's required from an integration and a governance perspective is going to be very different. So that's a long way of saying no. Sorry, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, that's interesting. Jeffrey, our next question is for you. Do you have data modeling tools to support modeling MariaDB NoSQL?
As a matter of fact, we do. Sandhill Consultants works with data modeling tools that will handle relational as well as NoSQL. MariaDB is a target, as well as things like Neo4j for doing relationships and graph type things, as well as knowledge graphs and various other permutations of NoSQL databases.
Got it. Thanks, Jeffrey. Here's a question I think we all can kind of weigh in on. Is the increasing use of cloud services within enterprises making data governance easier or harder? Brett, what are your thoughts?
I love the either or type situation. I'm going to cut down the middle again and say it's neither. It takes more thoughtful planning, in the end, it can make it an easier type situation because you're going to be able to leverage those cloud platforms. But again, upfront requires more thoughtful planning to make sure you're not putting yourself at risk.
Understood. Lewis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was rambling on about when I started talking about distributed SQL and, incorporation of JSON as a way of dealing with semi-structured data in what has traditionally been just fully structured transactional database territory. So I'm going to join Brett with the cut it down the middle. You basically need to look at what do these new features and what does this new functionality mean for your business? If I apply it, what does it mean? And then go back and make sure you do the governance. I'm a fan of try to figure out how to leverage the technology to get the business where it wants to go first, and then figure out how to make sure you're not going to end up in jail because you're violating some regulatory statute or something, right? So technology first, governance second is my view, but I'm not in a governance position.
Got it. Jeff, how about you?
I generally take the position that all technology is just a means to an end. And that end is basically, is what you're doing useful to the business? And that's really where you got to take a look at. So if speed is important to the business, then maybe in certain circumstances, it would be easier if we consolidated certain things. If, it's a different, objective that the business has, then maybe you configure it slightly different. So there's really no one size fits all, which is really, I guess, saying what the other two folks have just said. It's really, I'll flip it around. I will say it's understanding the business and governing, and then its application to technology to get the most out of the technology to meet the expectations of the business. That's my answer.
Well, real quick, if there's one thing you'd really like our audience to keep in mind moving away from today's event, what would that be? And Brett, let's start with you.
I thought that last answer was really good, which is, technology is a means to an end. And if I was to try to correlate why we see so many customers and prospects coming to us saying this didn't work, overwhelmingly it's because they put the technology first and forgot about the business outcome they were trying to achieve, which ultimately meant that they were disconnected from the business. So it's absolutely imperative to start with a clear business outcome, clear requirements, and then feed that through your entire process so you stay tightly aligned to your business and ultimately deliver what they need versus what you think they need.
Got it. Lewis, your final remarks.
Innovate first, govern second, understand that as data moves to the edge and is processed at that point of action, that the data integration and governance challenges will change, and so will the products from folks like Brett and the services from folks like Jeffrey.
Understood. And Jeffrey, how about you?
Like I said before, it all comes down to, is the business able to achieve what it needs to achieve? And that's usually the way that I look at it. I work kind of backwards from the business back to the technology. Technology is great, and there's awesome things that you can do, and abilities to discover data, do AI, data analytics. It's awesome stuff. But if the business can't use it, then it's a lot of work for not a lot of return. So that's kind of what I think I'll leave you with.
Understood. Wise words. Well, I would like to give a huge thank you to our speakers today for coming on board and sharing their insights and expertise. Once again, Brett Hansen, Chief Marketing Officer at Semarkey, Lewis Carr, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Mariadb, and Jeffrey Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants. If you would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same exact URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived, and you will receive an email from us once that archive is posted. And if you would like a PDF of the deck, you can go to the handouts section on the console once that archive is live. Also, as I mentioned before, just for participating in today's event, you could win a $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on July 29th. That's tomorrow. We will let you know if you are the lucky viewer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.